Kitchen smelled like pot roast and something I couldn't name right away. Something familiar and wrong at the same time. My mom had set the table with the good dishes, the white ones with the little blue flowers around the edges that only came out for Thanksgiving and Easter. I noticed that before I noticed anything else. The good dishes on a random Sunday in March. My brother sat across from me, his new wife next to him, her hand resting on top of his like they were posing for a photo. She smiled at me when I walked in. I smiled back. Neither of us meant it. My dad was at the head of the table, already serving himself, and my mom was still fussing with the rolls even though they were fine. I sat down and thought, this is nice. I thought, it's been a while since we all ate together like this. I should have known better. I moved back home 2 years before that dinner, and I want to be clear about why, because I've gotten that look from people. The slightly raised eyebrow, the pause before they say, "Oh, that's great." Like moving in with your parents at 31 means something failed. My dad had a second heart attack in November. My mom called me at 6 in the morning and I could hear it in her voice before she said a single word. I was in my apartment in Columbus, 40 minutes away, and I remember sitting on the edge of my bed in the dark, thinking about how long 40 minutes actually is. He was okay. He came home. But he wasn't the same kind of okay he was before. He got tired faster. He got confused sometimes, just for a moment. Just a flicker. And then it passed. But I saw it. My mom saw it. And my mom was 63 and had her own bad knee and her own appointments. She kept rescheduling because she didn't want to leave him alone. So I moved home. I sublet my apartment to a colleague and I moved into my old bedroom with the window that looked out over the backyard. And I told myself it was temporary. And maybe it was always going to be temporary. But 2 years went by anyway. I work in healthcare administration. I don't save lives. I keep the systems running that let other people save lives, and I'm good at it. I was remote 3 days a week and in the office too. And it worked. It worked well, actually. I paid my parents $800 a month. Their mortgage was $1,100, so I was covering more than half of it. I bought groceries most weeks. I took my dad to his cardiology appointments because my mom got too anxious in medical waiting rooms and would ask the same questions over and over until my dad got frustrated. I was good at sitting still and waiting. I'm not saying any of this to sound noble. I'm saying it because it matters. It matters for what happened at that dinner. My brother had been living in Phoenix for 4 years with his wife Gianna. They got married right before I moved home. A small ceremony, very quick, in a way that made my mom cry at the reception, for reasons I wasn't totally sure about. My mom said it was because she was happy. My dad said that too. I had met Gianna 3 times before the wedding. Once at a Christmas visit, once at a birthday dinner, once at the engagement party that was announced about 6 weeks after they started dating. Each time she was pleasant, laughed at the right moments, complimented my mom's house. She had this way of leaning slightly toward whoever she was talking to, like what they were saying was the most interesting thing she'd ever heard. It worked on people. It worked on my parents. It didn't work on me, but I told myself that was my problem. I told myself I was being protective in a way that wasn't fair to her, projecting things, being the older sister who couldn't let her baby brother have his life. I tried to like her. I actually tried. They moved back from Phoenix in February, about 6 weeks before that dinner. My brother said the job market out there had gotten rough, that they needed a reset. He asked if they could stay with my parents for a few weeks while they got their footing. My parents said yes. Of course they did. The first week, I stayed out of it. The second week, I noticed things. Gianna slept late. That's not a crime. But she also didn't work, which I hadn't known before they moved in. My brother had mentioned she was between things, and I pictured that as a few weeks of job searching. What I found was a person who got up at 11, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table scrolling her phone, and then moved to the couch every day. She didn't offer to help with groceries. She didn't offer to help with my dad. When my mom cooked, Gianna ate and thanked her and then went back to her phone. Once, my mom dropped a pan in the kitchen and I heard it from upstairs and came down, and Gianna was sitting at the table 8 feet away and had not moved. My brother worked. He'd found something with a logistics company. Decent pay, long hours. He was gone by 7 and back by 6. And when he came home, he was tired and Gianna was cheerful. And I watched my mom wait on both of them. And I kept my mouth shut. But I started paying attention. I'm good with numbers. It's part of my job. I notice patterns. And what I noticed was this. Small amounts of money kept disappearing. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would alarm anyone. $40 from the envelope my mom kept in the kitchen drawer for household cash. My dad's debit card left out on the counter when it was usually in his wallet. A charge on my mom's credit card statement for a subscription service none of us recognized. And when I mentioned it, my mom said she must have signed up for something and forgotten. Maybe all of it was nothing. But I took note. I wrote it down. Date, amount, circumstance. I kept a note in my phone. At the end of 3 weeks, I had 11 entries. I chose a Sunday afternoon when my brother was out getting his car looked at, and I sat down with my mom at the kitchen table, and I told her what I'd noticed. I was careful. I wasn't accusatory. I just said, here are things I've observed, here are the dates, here are the amounts. I think it's worth being more careful with the household accounts for a while. My mom looked at my list. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You've always been hard on your brother." I said I wasn't talking about my brother. I was talking about the pattern. She said, "Gianna is going through a hard time." I asked what kind of hard time. She said she didn't think it was her place to share, and she folded her hands on the table, and she looked at me with that expression she gets when she thinks I'm being difficult, and I recognized the conversation was over. I said okay. I said I understood. I kept my voice even. I went upstairs and added one more entry to the note in my phone. The good dishes came out 3 days later. That Sunday. I sat down thinking it was a family dinner, thinking maybe my mom had mentioned the conversation to my dad, and this was going to be a reset of some kind. A clearing of the air. A chance to get on the same page. My dad waited until we'd served ourselves before he spoke. He was like that. My dad always delivered things formally, like announcements. He cleared his throat. He said my brother and Gianna were going to need the larger bedroom while they were staying with them. They needed more space, he said. It was just practical. I waited. He said they were thinking I could take the guest room. The guest room was 9 feet by 10 feet. It had a daybed and an IKEA dresser and no closet, just a rod behind a curtain my mom had put up. My current room was my childhood bedroom. Larger, with an actual closet, a real bed, a desk where I worked my remote days. My work equipment was set up there, my files, my monitors. I said, "You want me to move my home office into the guest room?" My dad said it was just for a little while, just while they got settled. My brother looked at his plate. Gianna looked at me. I looked at my dad and I said very calmly, "I pay $800 a month here. I cover more than half the mortgage. I take you to your appointments. I buy groceries." My mom said, "Sweetheart, we know that." I said, "Do you?" Nobody said anything. And I looked at the good dishes on the table, my mom's china, and I thought about how she'd gotten them out for this. How she'd made pot roast and put out the blue flower plates to soften what they were about to ask me. I put my napkin on the table. I said, "I'll think about it." I didn't touch the rest of my food. That night, I lay in my actual bed, and I did the math, not just the money math, though I did that too. I did the other kind of math, the kind where you count up what you've given against what you've been given back, and you try to figure out at what point the balance became what it is. 2 years, 24 months, $800 a month in rent, which I'd started paying even though my mom initially said not to, because I insisted, because I didn't want to be a burden. Groceries, maybe $300 a month on average. Appointments, errands. The weeks I'd covered the water bill or the electric because it was higher than expected. Time. The time I'd spent driving my dad to the cardiologist, sitting in waiting rooms, asking the right questions because my mom couldn't focus when she was scared. And now I was being asked to fold myself into a 9 by 10 room with my brother's wife, who did not work, who had been here less than a month, who I had 11 notes about in my phone, could have more space. I thought about what my mom had said. She's going through a hard time. I thought about the charge and the credit card statement, and then I made a decision, very quietly, without drama, the way I make most of my decisions. I opened my laptop. I want to explain something about how I found the apartment because people have asked me since and I think they expect a dramatic story. There wasn't one. I had been half watching the rental market in Columbus for months. Not seriously, not with intention, just the way you keep an eye on things when you're not totally sure how long a situation is going to last. I knew the neighborhoods. I knew the price ranges. I knew what I could afford. The apartment I found was in Clintonville, second floor of a 2-family hardwood floors, good light, in-unit laundry. The landlord was a retired teacher who had owned the house for 20 years. The rent was $9.50 a month. I applied that Monday. I was approved by Wednesday. I didn't say anything to my parents. Not yet. What I did instead was spend the rest of that week finishing what I'd started. My note in my phone had 11 entries and I wanted to be thorough before I left. I checked our family's shared streaming account, the one I'd been paying for since my parents didn't know how to set it up, and I found a profile that had been created 3 months before Gianna and my brother moved in. It was under a name I didn't recognize. The viewing history was active. Someone had been using our account from a Phoenix address. I checked the Amazon household account my mom had added me to years ago for convenience. There were orders I didn't recognize. Small things. Household items, a piece of jewelry, a set of luggage, shipped to an address in Phoenix, over 9 months. The total, when I added it up, was $412. I printed everything. I put it in a folder. I thought about who to tell. I thought about going to my mom again. And I thought about her face at the kitchen table, her hands folded, the way she said, "You've always been hard on your brother." So I told my aunt instead. My mom's older sister. She lives 20 minutes away, has for 30 years. Calls my mom every Sunday morning without fail. She is practical in a way my mom is not. And she has never in my memory looked away from something because it was uncomfortable. I called her on Thursday and asked if I could come over. She said yes, and she made coffee and she sat across from me at her kitchen table and read through everything I'd printed. When she finished, she said, "Does your mother know?" I said I'd tried to tell her and it hadn't gone well. She said I'll talk to her. I said I was moving out on Saturday. She looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded. She said, "Good." Saturday came quickly. I had movers, 2 guys with a van who I'd hired through a local moving app, and they arrived at 8 in the morning. I had packed through the week in a methodical way. Boxes labeled. Nothing left to chance. I had a lot of practice being efficient with my feelings. My mom came downstairs when she heard the noise. She stood in the doorway of my room and watched me direct the movers. She said, "I didn't know you were leaving today." I said, "I know." She asked where I was going. I told her. Clintonville, Giralda Avenue, 2nd floor. She said, "We can talk about this. The room situation, we can figure something else out." I said I didn't think the room was really the issue. She was quiet. I picked up the box nearest to me and handed it to one of the movers. And I said, without looking at her, "I've been here for 2 years. I paid half the mortgage every month. I took Dad to every appointment since March of last year. I bought groceries. I did all of it because I wanted to, because I love you both, and because I thought it was what family was supposed to do." I paused. "And then you got out the good dishes to ask me to sleep in a room with a curtain rod instead of a closet so Gianna could have more space." My mom said, "That's not fair." I said, "I know you believe that." She started to cry. Not loudly, just quietly, the way she did when she was genuinely sad, rather than when she was trying to change the outcome of something. And I felt it. I did, in the place where the feeling lives that doesn't care about logic or fairness. I felt it pull. I kept packing anyway. The last thing I took was the small framed photo from my windowsill, the one of me and my dad at my college graduation. him with his hand on my shoulder. Both of us squinting into the sun. I wrapped it in a dish towel and put it in my bag. I told my mom I would call her. I told her I loved her. Both of those things were true. I walked out. The apartment in Clintonville was quiet. That was the first thing I noticed. Quiet in a specific way that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The kind of quiet that belongs to you. I unpacked in a single day. Set up my work desk by the window, put the graduation photo on the bookshelf. Bought a small succulent for the kitchen windowsill because someone had once told me that plants make a place feel lived in, and I thought they were probably right. I called my dad that first evening. He'd been at a church thing when I left, and I hadn't seen him before I went. He picked up on the second ring. He said, "Your mother's upset." I said I understood. He said, "You didn't have to go so fast." I said, "I know, Dad. I'm sorry it happened the way it did. I'm not sorry I left." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The appointment next week." I said I'd call him a few days before and we'd figure out the logistics. He said, "Okay." He said, "I miss you already." I said, "I know, Dad." I didn't say it back because I was trying not to cry, and sometimes you have to choose between saying the true thing and keeping yourself together, and that time I chose keeping myself together. My aunt called my mom the following Tuesday. I don't know exactly what she said. My aunt is not the kind of person who gives a full report after a difficult conversation. What I know is that she sat with my mom for 2 hours, and she went through the folder I'd put together, item by item. My mom called me that night. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready. I let it go to voicemail and I sat on my couch in the quiet apartment and I looked at the succulent on the kitchen windowsill and I just let myself be in the feeling for a minute. Not angry. Not sad. Just the particular kind of tired that comes after a long time of holding something. I listened to the voicemail the next morning. She said she hadn't known about the accounts. She said she hadn't put it together. She said she was sorry. She also said my brother hadn't known either, that he was devastated, that he was the one who confronted Gianna, not her. I didn't know what to do with that then. I held it and didn't respond. Gianna left on a Thursday 3 weeks after I moved out. Left as in packed 2 bags and drove away in her car while my brother was at work, and when he came home she was gone. No note. She'd taken the joint debit card and withdrawn what was in the checking account that morning. $1,600. She'd also, they discovered later, been using my parents' home equity line of credit to make cash advances for the past 4 months. $22,000 over the course of those 4 months and the 9 months before, when she was still in Phoenix and apparently had the login from a time my mom had shared it so she could help with something online. $22,000. My brother sat at my parents' kitchen table, the same table where they'd served me on the good dishes, and he put his face in his hands and he didn't move for a long time. My mom called and told me. Her voice was different, smaller. She said, "You tried to tell me." I said, "Yeah." She said, "I'm so sorry." I said I knew. And I did know. I knew she was sorry. I knew it was real, and I also knew that sorry and different aren't always the same thing, and I was going to need to sit with that for a while before I could figure out what came next. My dad's appointment was 2 weeks after that. I drove to their house at 9 in the morning, same as always. And my dad was standing on the porch, in his good jacket, waiting for me. He looked older in the way that happens in increments. And then you see all at once. He got in the car and we drove to the cardiologist's office and we sat in the waiting room with the bad coffee and the soft rock station playing too low to actually hear, same as always. He had his folder of documents on his knee, same as always. We sat there for 40 minutes before they called his name. At some point he reached over and put his hand on mine, briefly, the way he used to when I was small, and we were somewhere unfamiliar, and he wanted me to know he was there. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. My mom came to see the apartment in Clintonville on a Saturday in May, about 2 months after I moved out. She brought a casserole dish and a card, the kind without a pre-printed message inside, just blank. so she'd had to find her own words. She stood in the living room and looked around and said it was nice. I said I thought so too. She put the casserole in my fridge and I made coffee and we sat at my small kitchen table and we talked for 2 hours. We talked about my dad's follow-up results. We talked about my brother who was working with a lawyer about the home equity situation. We talked about practical things, logistics, the kind of conversation you can have when you're still figuring out the harder one. Before she left, she said, "I should have listened to you." I said, "I know." She said, "I don't want to lose you over this." I looked at her. My mother, in her good weekend jacket, holding her keys. And I thought about all the versions of that sentence I had ever heard her say or not say. All the moments she had folded her hands on the table, all the pot roasts, the good china. I said, "You're not losing me, Mom. But some things have to be different." She nodded. She understood, or she was trying to. That's not nothing. Trying counts for something. I've learned to see the trying. The home equity situation took 6 months to partially sort out. My brother's lawyer managed to track some of Jonna's financial activity and filed the right paperwork, but $22,000 is a hard number to recover and they only got back a portion of it. My parents spent a lot of those months stressed in a specific way that shows up in short conversations and long silences. And I watched it from a slight distance now, which was painful in its own way. But my apartment stayed quiet. My own quiet. I stopped paying $800 a month in rent to people who couldn't tell me, straight, that I was valued in the place I had made space for myself. I paid $9.50 a month for walls that were entirely mine. I took my dad to his appointments. I bought my own groceries. I called my mom on Sundays, not every Sunday, but most of them. My brother and I talked more than we ever had before, which sounds strange given everything. But there's something about a person having their worlds taken apart that makes them want to be real in a way they weren't before. He told me he was sorry for things he'd never said were wrong. I told him I was glad he was okay. We are not the same as we were. But we are not nothing, either. I have the photo of me and my dad on my bookshelf. The graduation one. Both of us squinting into the sun. Some mornings I look at it when I'm getting coffee, and I think about that parking lot, the way the June heat felt after the ceremony. The way he looked at me with something I didn't have words for at 21, and have slightly more words for now. Proud. But also relieved. Relieved for me. Relieved that I had gotten somewhere, that the world had opened a door. I don't think I understood then what he was relieved about exactly. I think I understand it better now, because I know what it feels like to be in a place that doesn't have space for you, and I know what it feels like to leave it. And there is a particular kind of relief in that, the kind that lives in your chest after you've been holding your breath for a long time and you finally let it go. I keep the note in my phone still. 11 entries, never deleted. Not because I need it. Because I need to remember that I paid attention when it mattered. That I wrote things down. That I saw clearly even when I was told I wasn't seeing clearly. That's its own kind of inheritance. The kind nobody puts in a casserole dish or hands across a kitchen table. The kind you give yourself. I've thought a lot about the sequence of things. Not to assign blame, I'm past that mostly. But because I think there's something important in the order of how it all happened, and I don't want to lose it. I paid attention. That's where it started. I noticed a $40 gap in a kitchen envelope and I wrote it down instead of letting it go. I noticed a streaming profile I didn't recognize. I noticed a charge on a credit card that my mom waved away, and I didn't wave it away with her. I kept a note in my phone with 11 entries, dates and amounts and circumstances, and at the time I wasn't sure what I was building. I was just building it. That habit. The one where you write things down instead of talking yourself out of what you saw. That came from somewhere. It came from years of working in a field where the difference between a clean record and a disaster is whether someone paid attention on a Tuesday afternoon when nothing felt urgent. I didn't know I was applying that skill to my own life, but I was. And here's the thing about Gianna. She counted on the opposite. She counted on the fact that families don't keep records on each other, that love makes people uncomfortable with suspicion, that nobody wants to be the one who looked too hard. She was right about my mom. She was right about my brother, who trusted her completely because he loved her, and because trust is what love asks of you. She was wrong about me, not because I'm smarter than they are, but because I was paying attention for different reasons. I'd been paying attention for 2 years, running logistics for people I loved, and that kind of attention becomes a habit whether you want it to or not. What happened to Gianna was a direct result of what Gianna did. The $22,000 she took didn't disappear. It existed on paper, in bank records, in a home equity account with a transaction history. The lawyer found the thread. You don't get to quietly pull money out of a family's financial foundation for 9 months and leave no trace. She believed she would. She was wrong. And what happened to me was also a direct result of what I did. I documented. I went to someone who would listen, my aunt, instead of banging on the same closed door twice. I signed a lease before I needed to, which meant I wasn't scrambling when they brought out the good dishes and asked me to make myself smaller. I left on my own terms on a Saturday morning with movers I'd hired in advance. Nobody handed me that. I built it quietly. In the weeks when I was still making my dad's coffee and taking out the recycling and acting like everything was fine. The thing about integrity, real integrity, not the performed kind, is that it doesn't wait for an audience. I kept that note in my phone when no one knew I was keeping it. I showed up to my dad's appointments after I moved out, not because anyone was watching, but because that's who I decided to be a long time ago, and a hard month doesn't change a decision like that. My mom and I are still figuring out what we are to each other now. My brother and I talk more honestly than we ever did before, which is the strangest silver lining of this whole thing. I'm not going to tell you the ending is clean. It isn't. $22,000 was a lot of damage, and my parents are still feeling it, and that is genuinely sad. But I'll tell you this, I live in a quiet apartment in Clintonville with good light and in-unit laundry. I have a succulent on my kitchen windowsill and a graduation photo on my bookshelf. I paid my rent on time last month, and I will pay it on time next month, and I still have that note in my phone. 11 entries. I don't need it anymore, but I keep it to remember that I trusted myself when it was easier not to. That's worth keeping.